Yes, hello once again. It's the best part of your 2 weeks, you sad, sad people. It's the magic morning wood.
Would. Hey, I thought I'd join in there.
Yeah, good. Well,
Yeah,
nice try.
thanks. I tried. Yeah.
Clive Davis and him.
Ron. No
Excellent.
name, no last name.
No, no. You have to sell it in order to buy your house.
Okay, we gotta go to our the best part of the show. How's it going, Clive?
Uh, good. How are you, Ron?
Yeah, not bad. All right, good. So moving on to the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where we talk about movies
Hmm.
and we're reacting
You
to
just can't
what
stop us from talking. I've tried. We've tried
no.
hey, Ron, let's discuss sports. Let's talk about the new Revlon lineup of lipstick or whatever the fuck Revlon make. I don't know. And we just can't do it. We keep coming back to films. So,
Yeah.
yep.
Right. So we are and our
Yeah.
algorithm is on and we're
Yeah.
reacting to what we are reacting to?
Well, last time, Ron,
It's Satyricon, right?
well done. Yes.
Fellini's Satyricon. Just remembered just now.
Right. Yes. So my choice at the top of the show here, I decided to go with some more Fellini, sort of Fellini plus, actually, it turns out. And we did the 1968 horror anthology, specifically Edgar Allan Poe anthology, Tales of Mystery and Imagination, aka Spirits of the Dead, or Histoire Extraordinaire, I guess, maybe in the original French. How
That
was that?
was awesome.
Thank you very much.
I oh, tu parles français?
Oui, oui,
Oui, oui.
monsieur.
Histoire extraordinaire.
Yeah. Um, and apparently also at some point it was called Powers of Evil when it was released on VHS in the UK, but I think it was missing a sequence
Mhm.
because it's a 3-part, 2-hour 3-part anthology. Fellini did one of them, the last one. So we'll do it, I guess, segment. But had you seen this before by any chance?
No.
No, I hadn't seen this before either. It was one of those big blind spots for me actually, because it's one of those films that's
Did you
quite
did you
heavily
know it
regarded.
was did you know it was an anthology and that Fellini was only one third of it, or
Yes,
did you
yeah,
did know that? Okay.
I was aware of that, and in fact, it was the people in general when you look up this movie, or when you look up reviews in this movie, usually people kind of seem to really love the Fellini sequence, right? The Toby Dammit sequence, and kind of downplay the other two.
Right.
But I found it kind of interesting across the board. I can see why people like the Fellini most, maybe, but it's definitely a superior horror anthology, I think, because
Mm,
the horror anthology is kind of notoriously a difficult thing to pull off, I think.
sure.
Um, and this one is definitely so. It's interesting as well because it's um I think when people think of horror anthologies, they don't necessarily tend to think of this one. They tend to think of like the Amicus ones, or in more recent years, things like the ABCs of Death and stuff like that, right? Have made a bit of a comeback. But this is very much more um in the tradition of, like, in the 60s and 70s, they were quite common, these multi-director anthologies, right? And they'd
Mhm.
usually be like one, they'd all be major players. There'd be like one French director, an Italian, a British one, an American one sometimes. They made quite a lot of them in the 60s and 70s,
Right.
a bit of a trend, which
Mm.
kind of has died out, really. You don't really get that
Yeah,
much.
you don't get them as much anymore. Yeah, yeah.
Um, which is yeah, it's kind of a bit of a shame. I quite like the format. It allows directors sometimes to kind of
I think they've
go
probably made the shift more to like television now, right? So they do the same
right,
kind of thing, but they have anthology series where they would
right,
do that, but then it would be a series rather than like a Tales from the Crypt or like a Twilight Zone like reboot kind of thing,
yeah,
right? Or
yeah,
Black Mirror, that kind of stuff, right?
yeah. But I do like the kind of concept because it allows people to play around a little bit with, some ideas that they might not have, you know, they might can't fill it out to a full feature, but they
Right.
But anyway, so in this case, first out the gate is Roger Vadim, and he does a version of so that, as I said, these are all Edgar Allan Poe stories, right? Metz Against Stein, starring Roger Vadim's wife at the time, Jane Fonda. So this comes out between The Game Is Over and Barbarella, right? Would have been the next film they made together.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it's Jane Fonda. I think I'm right in saying this is the only film she's in with her brother Peter.
Oh, yeah, and probably the only one where they are also love interests.
Yeah, that's kind of strange, even though it's all kind of quite chaste, right? Nothing really happens. Although Jane Fonda does wear some amazing costumes in this film.
Mm.
Like, it doesn't really excite me because she's never like particularly be my type or anything. But I could imagine if you were into Jane Fonda, this would kind of blown your top a little bit, especially pre-Barbarella as well, right?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so she plays like basically a very mean kind of countess, right, who has this decadent kind of life. Like, again, it's not that sexual, but it's kind of hinted at the kind of orgies and cruel games and things like that. And then there's
actually, I don't know if it's hinted at. I think it's actually in the summary. It said that she's like a nymphomaniac.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
what I mean is that there's nothing explicit in the film. Let's put it that
right.
way.
Yeah. It's not explicitly, but
and yeah, so she has a cousin, right? She has a cousin who lives nearby, and there's some kind of ancient family rivalry or something apparently. And the cousin is played by Peter Fonda, who apparently spent his time when he wasn't filming this writing Easy Rider.
oh,
Written while he was
doing this movie.
So there's one potential thing we could do for the next spin-off, whatever.
So we're not reacting.
Say again.
We're not reacting to this movie though.
Oh no, I forget it then.
Never mind.
And Peter Fonda, yeah, and she kind of, yeah, she seems to have a kind of a liking for him, but he's very I don't know what would the word for him be?
Aloof.
Yes, I guess, and he refers to himself as a happy man, right?
Yeah, he's just sort of like a simple guy, even though he's, I guess, supposedly as rich as she is because it's the same family. But you know, he's just got his own kind of little thing. He's got a little farm. He looks pretty like simple and fine, and he's content. Doesn't need anything else, and certainly doesn't need this kind of bitchy cousin coming in and you know wrecking his style, right, kind of thing. So, and she's quite like cartoonishly mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
It's interesting that so we watched the English dub of this version of the story, but there's a French dub as well, and Jane Fonda did the voices for both because apparently she was fluent in French, so she did her dubbing for both versions of the film. So the thing with the Peter, I think, because I find this sequence kind of basically there's he snubs her, she burns down his barn with his beloved kind of horses in does seem like they really do burn down an old barn as well, right? It's quite an impressive sequence, this barn being burnt to the ground.
Yeah, sure.
And then a black horse comes out, and I suppose it's intimated that it's the spirit of him coming back in the barn, and that's the kind of story.
Well, it's sort of implied before that they did have a relationship, and that so that maybe there was, but then he kind of spurned her or something like that, or she at least wanted more, and then he kind of didn't. And it's kind of unclear if there was ever actually really, but and why. But anyway, the idea is that now he's back to haunt her for killing him, basically.
Right.
Or she never intended to have him be killed, so she gets really upset that he burned in the fire. She just wanted to kind of punish him for not having doing what she wanted or something like that. But then he dies.
A tapestry as well is important.
Yeah,
story, isn't there?
That he's in, that the horse is in or whatever, and so he's
and so it's a fairly simple kind of said, and so it's not a particularly fantastic. I think for me at least, I'll get to what you think, but I think it kind of works as almost like a dreamlike kind of story. Apart from, I think the one weak element, oddly enough, might actually be Peter Fonda, because I don't know if it's as written or like how he plays it or something, but it's never convincing that this kind of predatory cougar woman would be interested in this pathetic kind of
I'll say that.
of a man who hangs out in trees and things, and you're like, why are you even bothering with this very boring man? I know his brother and all, but fucking hell, he's dull as dishwasher. Like the dishwasher, like that doesn't really.
I'll say that. He sort of like there's no. He's also not. I mean, I guess Peter Fonda, was he? Would you say he was handsome back in the day? Was he like a sex symbol back in the day? Because he's certainly not a kind of a really handsome guy. He's just very kind of plain, a little odd looking, and he's just this kind of guy. He doesn't really give her any. He's just like whatever, and she's like, "Love me," and he's like, "Okay, whatever." Right? It is just like what? There's no Despite the fact that they're actually family, there's zero chemistry.
Yeah, no.
So,
it's an
but it might have been. I think it might have actually been that the fact that they were like trying to play love interest, even though they were brother and sister, and it just didn't work. It's like when you have a relationship with someone that there's no chemistry, and then you kiss each other. There's like they say it's like kissing your brother or kissing your sister. Right. I think that's what it was. It was like it was a sibling chemistry rather than a romantic chemistry.
It is a weird casting choice, and it's an interesting point actually. You think about it, because Peter Fonda is like, because he was very much a kind of icon of his time, and we mentioned Easy Rider and all that, and so he became kind of symbolic of this kind of counterculture after the counterculture had become mainstream, I suppose, in a way.
Right. Yeah.
He's Hollywood royalty, right? The Henry Fonda son and all that. But but you're right. Apart from, he's not really a sex symbol, and he's not really an action star, and he's not really. I mean, I've always quite liked Peter Fonda, but I've never really thought of him as a huge acting heavyweight either. So you're onto something that I think, as him occupying a very strange sort of stardom. I don't really know what
he's like a character actor, but he's not a character actor either, right? So he's
that's right.
So I don't know.
He doesn't have the
he's sort of like a nepo baby, I guess.
Yes, although I don't.
I mean, he's okay. He's like not like a terrible one, right? But I think that's basically what it is. Both of them are kind of nepo babies, I guess you would say.
I suppose so. But with Jane Fonda, I always felt like, again, I don't necessarily think Jane Fonda is like amazing or anything, but she seems a bit more like, I kind of get the appeal.
Yeah, right.
Peter Fonda, I'm not saying I don't, because for some odd reason, I'm quite drawn to. Oddly enough, he's one of those names. If I see he's in something, I'm like, oh, Peter Fonda's in that. For some reason, and I think that's just because he was in a string of he was in like oddball movies through the 60s and 70s. So Peter Fonda's in something. There's a chance it might be interesting.
It's not necessarily him, but it's he made good choices, right?
Or just kind of weird choices. But no, I'd never really reflected on how strange a kind of a star Peter Fonda is, really, but he is a bit of an odd one. And this role kind of highlights it, I suppose.
It was kind of a I got the same thing. It's like why do you care about that guy? Like, who cares?
But apart from that, it's not a bad little.
It was okay. It was I didn't really like. I didn't really get the tension I think you're supposed to get. That's kind of like that's inherent in Poe stories and stuff. That it was the dread or the foreboding or whatever it is. I mean I kind of knew where it was going. I thought it left a little to be desired in terms of tension. It was just sort of like it kind of, you could kind of see the end, and it didn't really surprise you. It didn't really do anything interesting with it. So it was okay. It was fine. It hit all the beats, I guess it was supposed to, but it was sort of like it was like a meh. It was like a so what.
Right. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that as well, because apart from the second segment, the Wilson one, like the other two, they're unusual. Given, I mean, assuming you could choose anything you could like you from the Edgar Allan Poe kind of, they're kind of odd. I'm not. They're strange choices. They're kind of fairly obscure choices to have gone for as
Sure,
adaptations. Especially this one. It's not really a Poe story that I think looms large. Oh yeah, remember Metzgenstein, that classic Edgar Allan Poe.
sure.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's a bit of a obscure one, really, I think.
Yeah, I'm not like a like a big like connoisseur of Poe stories. I mean, I know like the big ones,
Uh-huh.
like the main ones, but I he must have been relatively prolific and written. I guess maybe these were short stories or something. I'm
Yes,
guessing. I don't know.
yeah, all short
Yeah,
stories.
so I'm not familiar with the short story, so I didn't really know any of these
Right.
stories. So
I've read most of his stuff, I think. And this, I think I have read this one, but I had no recollection of the
the
other.
direction
I
of
think
it,
it
yeah.
might
So
even be, I think I might have read it, might even have been his first published short story or something like
oh
that.
really? Okay.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, I was curious as to why this one was chosen. But yeah, I don't, the one thing that did
Maybe they had a book of published short stories and it was the first one in there.
could be,
Yeah,
I
this
do
one will
that.
do.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hey,
that'll do.
hey,
Oh, I won't read
this
anymore.
one.
This one's good now.
Yeah.
Yeah, do the
Call
first
your
one. Yeah,
brother.
okay.
Yeah. The only thing I did was notable about this one. I thought the music was interesting. It was
Mm,
credited to one Jean Prodromide, I think his name is. I thought the music to this was notable because it was like this
mm,
weird kind of insistent, like pounding, like
mm,
machinery or something in the background.
mm,
And
mm,
for the time, for 1968, it's like it's proto kind of industrial. It's even a little bit
mm.
proto techno music. You didn't really hear
Okay.
music like this at the
Mm.
time. So I thought that was kind of an
Mm.
interesting.
Yeah. I'll say that.
Um, yeah, so okay, shall we move on to
Yeah,
second
sure.
segment? So this is Louis Malle, working from a script by Clement Biddlewood, and this is a version of William Wilson, which is probably the most famous of the three Poe stories here. This is like a, a doppelganger story,
Mm,
kind of like Dostoevsky would later do with a double and stuff like that.
mm, mm.
Um,
Which we did on the show before.
yeah, we did. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, um, previously filmed as The Student of Prague, a silent film. I think I saw the 1913 version, which was pretty good, I remember. And then there's another couple of silent versions as well. This one starring, the most handsome man in the world once upon a time, I guess, Alain Delon,
Right.
as yeah, well, he's a little psychopath, basically, isn't he, from the beginning?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Little kid who's kind of, I thought at first, I wasn't quite sure. It looked like he was at like a military academy or something, but I think it was just
Yeah.
a school for boys where they dressed like that, or they're gonna,
Yeah, I think it was just a private school or
yeah,
something.
like a
Yeah.
Prussian kind of school or something like
Yeah,
that.
sure. Yeah.
And yeah, so he basically it's him confessing uh, to a priest, to a Catholic priest, and he's telling, it's a flashback, and he's telling the story about
Mm,
how basically at different points in his life, suddenly this doppelganger of himself turns up and like kind of bests him, basically.
yeah, and foils his evil plans, whatever he's trying to do. Doing. He's basically like a bad guy, similar to I guess Jane Fonda, I guess in the first one, which is
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
these like bad these villainous, inherently villainous like kind of bad people, and then doing his bad thing where he's like bullying a boy or doing whatever it is, stealing or whatever he's doing, and then he's cheating in the gambling and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
then this guy will turn up and then kind of like you know
Expose him, right?
expose him,
Yeah.
and then rides off in the sunset and then turns up again the next time this happens, right? So
Yeah. And spoiler alert, Alan Delon can't take it anymore, so ends up kind of killing himself. But well, he kills the other one first, right? And then that he kind of kills himself, I suppose, in a way.
yeah, and I guess it's sort of
Open
implied that
ended.
yeah, it's not really clear, but it's sort of implied that it's like actually just himself, and that I don't know, like it's
Yeah.
another version of himself, that it's not a doppelganger, that it's just another like it's part of him, and then
Yeah,
you can't live without me and stuff like that, and so then he ends up killing
yeah.
himself because
And
so
Brigitte Bardot, Roger Vadim's ex, turns up in this one with dark hair and smoking a cigar, and it's quite interesting to see Brigitte Bardot in this kind of mode. And I like seeing Alain Delon playing evil as well, actually, because he does have that handsomeness of his. It does have that slightly cruel edge to it.
uh,
Like he looks like he'd be a
yeah.
and and apparently there's like I didn't realize this until recently. I was looking up Alain Delon for something else, and there's like this whole in France. It's quite well known. It's not that well known outside of France, but there's this whole slight kind of conspiracy theory about like how he might be involved in the murder of some kind of like notorious like gangster character, like a Dillinger type of guy, or like because he did hang out with the criminal underworld. Like he was quite the bad boy, apparently, was Alain Delon, which is kind of part of his kind of appeal, right? So something about him makes sense as a bad guy rather than a heel. Like he looks like
Right.
he's a good. I like him as a heel.
Uh,
But again, this one, I thought it was they all look amazing, right? They all look really good, like locations and production design, and this is Tonino Della Colli who shoots this one as well, right? So of course it looks great. But I think when we were discussing the double before, we were talking about how the whole doppelganger thing is it's weird because it's a very creepy kind of concept, but you can't really figure out why. You can't put your finger out why it's so creepy. It just is.
yeah.
And I think in this version, because it's not the doppelganger that's the bad guy, then there's nothing kind of threatening about the doppelganger because he's the good guy, right?
Right.
So even though I thought this story played out fine as just like a bit of anthology, and more than an anthology filler, it was well done, but it wasn't creepy like a doppelganger story can be, because the protagonist was the evil one, right? Like there was no threat from the doppelganger at all.
Right. Yeah, I can see what you mean there, but yeah, I guess all three of these movies these segments, I guess. I never really watched any of them as horrors, even though they're
Right.
Poe stories. You know what I mean? And yeah, I always, Poe is sort of like considered the grandfather of horror or whatever it is, but I've never found any of his stories particularly scary. It's just sort of like they have kind of like a supernatural element, but I've always looked at them more of like a more dramatic with like shades of supernatural elements of
Right.
it. But I never really watched any of his stuff as horror, and I didn't watch any of these as horror. It was just sort of like as a straight up storytelling drama and stuff like that. So I think it worked. I thought I really liked this segment actually, because I thought it was it was really different. Like I've never seen, as you said, it's the doppelganger element is really creepy, but it did something totally different that I've never seen before, which is flip it on its head, right? Which and I didn't yes, it wasn't creepy, but I didn't need it to be creepy because I was looking for the creepiness, so I just thought it was a really interesting story, and of course you're rooting for the doppelganger in this one, which is you never do, right? So I thought it was I mean, of course it's on Poe. Okay, and Poe did that, I guess, originally, right? Not Louis Malle, but I thought he did it really well, and I was really just enraptured with this one. Like I couldn't take my eyes off this one. Yeah, this one I really needed to know how this story played out, so I really liked it a lot. So
that's interesting. But I didn't want credit to do that. I think Malle and his screenwriter might have actually had quite. It's been a while since I read William Wilson, but I get the feeling the short story was more from the doppelganger being a kind of threat point of view, but it kind of resolved. I always get it confused. There's another Edgar Allan Poe story as well, right? Is it called The Man in the Crowd or something like that, which is a similar kind of doppelganger. So I might be thinking about
I see.
that one. And I think there's another short story um, um, by another famous 19th century short story writer whose name eludes me now, but from around the same time, which I also get confused with something
I see.
about
Right.
but oh, but that's interesting. Yeah, I that makes sense. Your take on it kind of makes sense. If you're not expecting horror necessarily,
Mm.
like as the title suggests, it's tales of mystery and imagination as opposed to or extraordinary history, I guess.
Yeah, it's more extraordinary. It's
Yes,
interesting. It's strange things rather than necessarily horror, scary things, right? So
yeah,
yeah,
and a lot
I
of
thought that it was well done.
yeah, a lot of Poe stories do play out. Yeah, like they're like supernatural, like morality plays.
Yeah,
Like
I would say it's like, I mean, the modern equivalent these days would be like Black Mirror episode. Have you seen any Black Mirror?
I've seen some, yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of those are, like morality tales, but now it's all technology and stuff like that. They're kind of darker, but at the same time, they're not really horror necessarily. But but they're all there's some sort of morality, theme at the end, right? Kind of
right,
usually that you're supposed to get from it. So I thought it was more than that, right? More
yeah.
those
Well, I suppose that's in the tradition of
parables.
Twilight Zone as well. Did like a lot of
Hmm,
Twilight Zone stuffs are
exactly.
they have like a message or something.
Message, yeah, and I mean, Twilight Zone weren't all horror, right? They weren't all scary.
No, a
They're
lot of them
you
weren't
know,
actually. They were more
yeah.
science fiction-y or
Science fiction or
yeah.
or just fantasy. Yeah. So so I would put that more in this
I
category.
think
So
Outer
I just
Limits
no.
was in general more horrific, I
Yeah,
think.
as was like Tales from the Crypt and
Right. Yeah.
or well, we Creep Show. Creep Show,
Yeah.
was that a show? Yeah, Creep Show. Yeah. So,
That was a movie, but
but didn't they reboot it as a show
it might have
recently?
done recently.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. So far it's the Louis Malle is your favorite. So here we go. So yeah, finally we get to Fellini and screenwriter Bernardino Zapponi. And yeah, so this is well, he's titled it Toby Dammit, but the original story is Never Bet the Devil Your Head, right? Which is kind of I quite like the original. It's quite a short story, but it's quite a it's probably the one that's nearest to horror and a little bit of a kind of like a sick, like an extended sick joke almost, and it's very kind of metaphysical. It's a weird little short story which I quite like. And this version is quite a loose adaptation of it, I would
Yeah.
say.
It even said that in the credits is like it was like loosely based. Or even there was some word. It was like an
Yes,
adverb there that really implied that this is very very far from the
yes,
original source material. So yeah,
yes. In fact, I think it almost like yeah, you don't really need it's not necessary to have a working knowledge of the short story or yeah it's almost its own it's there's just a yeah there's a kind of striking kind of final image which it has in common I suppose. um
yeah.
so this one stars Terence Stamp, who another interesting we're talking about Peter Fonda and how maybe um his kind of status or whatever is maybe slightly lost or we don't quite understand it. I always think of Terence Stamp a little bit as well. Like I'm aware that in the 60s, Terence Stamp was like considered the shit, right? Like Terence Stamp was like, oh my God, it's Terence fucking Stamp. Oh, like he was like a bit like Alan Delon, actually.
Mm.
But I have to admit, and again, I've nothing against Terence Stamp, and I quite like Terence Stamp and things, but I'm a little bit too young to totally connect with that. So for me, Terence Stamp is that's just Terence Stamp. But how do you how do you stand with it? Do you revere Terence Stamp or is he
Well, I do, but for a very different reason. Is
okay?
because he was General Zod in Superman 2, and which was growing
Ah,
up one of my favorite movies. So yeah, so
yes, I
yeah,
keep
so
forgetting about that. Yeah, I think that's the yeah. If I'd have cared as much about Superman, I think yes, he kind of regenerated his stardom for a new generation, right? So
sure, yeah, yeah. So yeah, that was yeah, that movie was like everything for me when I was a kid. Superman 2
Right.
is so good.
And
And
he's a good Zod.
he's a great Zod. Yeah, yeah. Michael Shannon was good, but Terrence Stamp will always be Zod, right? So
Okay.
he's the Zod, right? So yeah, so I can never see Terrence Stamp and not think, bow before Zod.
Right.
Like,
Right.
yeah, so
But I do quite like him in this, I have to say. I find this, and again, not being overly familiar, I get the feeling this is quite a self-parodic role.
mm,
Like, I think he's really playing with his image of the super cool 60s
mm,
icon. Um, yeah, so yeah, he kind of plays a fucked up version of himself, basically, right?
yeah.
A very famous British actor who everyone's revering, but he's also an alcoholic, and he
And a
flies.
vampire.
Say again.
And a vampire, I guess, right? Is he supposed to be a vampire?
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think of him as a. Did
I
you think
thought he was a
of
I
him?
thought that's what he was. I thought that's what the point was. He's a vampire. That's what like the bright lights and all that stuff was.
You know what? I That didn't occur to me at all.
That's why he had to be like beheaded and stuff, right?
That's interesting. I didn't even. I mean, now that you say it, he certainly looked vampiric.
Huh.
And also the other thing
I could be wrong. Yeah.
I was thinking a little bit as well. There's something reminded me of the way like everyone was like, ah, you're so awesome, ah," and he's just like, like he that period of time when Robert Pattinson was in the Twilight films.
Huh. Yeah.
There's something like that
I,
about him, isn't there?
I'm looking at the summaries and none of it actually mentions a vampire, but I feel like I read somewhere that it was supposed to be a vampire. And when I started watching it, that's what I was assuming it
Okay.
was. Oh, actually, to tell you what, I'll tell you just before you go on too much about this movie, before we get back into it. This
Hmm,
is going to be the first time, I think, ever that
right.
we've been doing this algorithm, this show, that we actually chose the same movie. Because what happened was that my first choice,
Yeah.
when after we finished the Fellini, I started going through Fellini's filmography,
Yeah.
and in IMDb, Toby Dammit is actually listed separately from
Yes, it was
Spirits of the
released
Dead.
separately in some
Yeah,
territory.
yeah. So I was like, Toby Dammit, oh, it's a horror that Fellini did. That sounds with Terrence Stamp,
Ah.
that sounds pretty good. So I'm gonna choose Toby Dammit. So I
Ah.
went to go find a copy of it, couldn't find it because I didn't even look how long it was. I just thought figured it was a standalone movie. Couldn't
Right.
find it. Then switched to something else. Switched to Life of Brian, which we'll talk about
Yeah.
later. And then when I started to watch yours, and I was like, oh, this is Toby Dammit. So we
Ah,
actually picked
interesting.
the same movie. So what was my point of that? So anyway, so when in the what you call it, the summary for Toby Dammit,
Hmm.
not for this one, but for the summary for Toby Dammit, I believe
Ah.
he's listed as a vampire
Huh. I'm wondering if that's got something to do with. I wonder if because I'm not quite sure where that was released, but it was definitely released
or
standalone.
not. I don't
I'm
know.
wondering if the promotional material for that might have had some sort of iconography of vampirism or something like
Yeah, I
that.
don't know, and I don't know where I got the word vampire from, but yeah, when I was watching it, I just sort of had it in my head that he was a vampire, so I don't know
Right.
where I got
Well,
that
it's
from.
not totally. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea that he could maybe be a
Mm,
vampire of some sort, right?
right,
I mean, it doesn't necessarily not work. Okay.
right, yeah.
So yeah, he's gone to Rome and he's promised to do a spaghetti western about the life of Christ, right?
Mm,
And mainly because he's going to get a Ferrari, um, which apparently is as a direct it's a direct steal from in real life. Clint Eastwood
mm,
agreed to be in. So another one of these anthology films, I think like from a couple of years before this, 1966, was this film called The Witches, which was another one of these anthology films by heavy hitter. I can't remember who directed it, but Clint Eastwood is in one of the segments, and apparently that was his deal. Like, okay, I'll come and I'll be in your movie because, of course, at this point he'd just been in the spaghetti westerns, right? So he was massive in Italy, and so he said, okay, I'll come and be in your film as long as I can get a Ferrari. So this whole Toby Dammit is apparently a kind of extended joke on Clint Eastwood.
Oh, I see. Oh, that one had 5 stories. and they're
The
all
witches, yeah.
they all had Mauro Bolognini, Vittorio De Sica, Pier Paolo Pasolini, Franco Rossi, and Luchino Visconti.
Right. All
I
said
want to
with the
I
same
want to eat
accent,
some fettuccine.
regardless of the
I need
country.
some penne and some fettuccine on my
And a
pizza.
Ferrari. Yeah, so and he gets his Ferrari and he loses his head, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is I mean it's interesting actually. I just realized I wrote down something which might back up your um not claim, but suspicion or conceit. He does actually say when he turns up at the airport, Terence Stamp says, I only live during the night.
Yeah.
The direct quote.
And also he's got the flash and he's like, hey, light,
Yeah.
light. So I don't know necessarily where I got it from.
Yeah, so this is very, 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 very Fellini, right? This is like filled with bizarre faces and people and extremely stylized. They even use like miniatures for Rome, and it's all smoke and like it's a totally like hermetically sealed kind of weird world, which yeah, a bit like Satyricon, also like his Casanova film with Donald Sutherland looked like that, like patently fake, but like so it's very it's you can't get any more Fellini, right? This is Fellini as fuck, I think the phrase
Right.
would be. And I think that kind of so depending on how you get on with that, it's gonna like I like that, I have to admit, I like Fellini just be like some of the there's a bit in this where he has to go to a dinner party, right? And he's sat there and he's bored and he's getting drunk and he wants more alcohol. And there's a guy sat the other side of the table and he's like, look what this man can do. Look at his faces he can pull. And he just goes like, and everyone's like, he can do it all night. He never runs out of faces. And it's such a weird little kind of sight gag. But I found that hilarious. I kind of almost fell out of my chair laughing at that. So it's if you appreciate like Fellini's kind of sense of humor and very kind of bizarre way of looking at the world, then this probably was my favorite sequence, and I kind of understand why people say it's the best sequence. Although I would say it's not necessarily head and shoulders so much better than the rest, like people say it is, because I thought the other parts did have merit. How did you get on with Toby Dammit?
Yeah, so yeah, I don't know. I think I'm just not into Fellini's. Yeah. It's just not, yeah. I go into it even thinking that I would have chosen it, right? So it was basically
Right.
also my first choice. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is with me. You know, I feel almost embarrassed, but I just don't get this kind of movie. Like it's just not my cup of tea. Like yeah,
Right.
these types of things. So I wanted to like it. Everything about it should have said that I should have liked it, but I just, I just didn't see. I couldn't get on with it. Yeah, I just thought it didn't go anywhere for me, even though it was constantly going.
I was
So
wondering
in
as
a
I was
car.
watching it, I was wondering because I have to admit, yeah, I even though I did really enjoy it and I really liked it, I do slightly I slightly understand where you're coming from. If based on this, I mean, I like things like Satyricon, for example, a lot more. But if just based if I was, came face to face with a hardcore Toby Dammit fan, like I would find it a little bit too much as well. Like to just calm down just a little bit. It's not quite
Right.
second coming,
Yeah.
I was wondering, did it cross over from just and what that into this? Did it at all cross over into actively irritating at any point? I was wondering if that
It
happened.
wasn't irritating. I just sort of like I just thought it was kind of boring. I mean, like it
Okay.
was. He kind of was kind of just sitting there, like half asleep, like hungover, drunk, the whole time, and they asked him all these. There's these weird things happening that didn't really seem to have any through line or meaning, and then he just didn't really do anything. And then he got into his car and he drove for like 20 minutes, and then the end. It was like okay, so that's it. Or I was like,
Oh, you forget the creepy little girl with the bouncing white
yeah,
curtain.
it was sometimes, and sometimes there was a
Who's the
girl who was
devil,
the
I guess.
devil.
Yeah,
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 but didn't do anything, and then she picked up his head at the end, I guess, right? So I
yeah.
don't know. I just thought it was like I yeah, I don't know. I feel embarrassed to be honest, because I feel like it's sort of like a, oh, you don't like Fellini, oh well, then you don't know anything about it. It's
Well, you
like
did like
I feel like I'm
Satyricon. You did like
like oh,
Satyricon.
you don't know anything about film, right? But
Right.
I don't know. I just don't get it. I you know I feel like I feel like what's wrong with me that I don't like these types of movies, because this is film, this is cinema, right?
Right.
But this is
Right.
Fellini. But I just don't get it. It's
No, no,
just
I
doesn't read for me. Yeah.
oh, based on this segment, and I can get that. It's definitely an exercise in style and mood about all
Yeah,
this,
sure.
right?
Yeah. And good on him. He's got a very distinct style. Good for
Right.
him having his own thing going on. And I really appreciate directors that have like such a distinct style that you can tell it's them without even knowing that they've done it, right? You can look
Right.
at something, there's certain directors that are like that where you can watch something and say, oh, well, this is that director, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I
Right.
appreciate those people that are so strong in their vision that
Yeah.
the movie is shaped around them rather than around the story, or which I appreciate that. And good on him for having that style. It just that style just doesn't it just isn't my cup of tea, so it's yeah.
So your favorite segment then would have been the William Wilson.
I did, yeah, it was,
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
interesting.
yeah, yeah.
So we should also mention as well that apparently when it was released in the States, it had a intro and an outro with a Vincent Price narration.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah, because it was released by AIP, and I guess that makes sense because they would have done those Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe films with Vincent Price, right? That cycle from Followed House of Usher on in the 60s. So I guess that was a bit of a cash in on that.
Sure.
But actually, I was thinking we maybe might do the Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe cycle for this year's Halloween series
Oh,
of horror
okay.
films, something a bit different.
Sure.
So how are we thinking overall then? Considering William Wilson's your favorite, I'm a bit more of a traditionalist. I went for Toby Dammit, but I think I don't think there's a duffer in the bunch, right? I don't think there's anything like
Yeah,
really
I didn't.
the
Yeah,
slide down.
how do you pronounce it? Metzgergenstein? Is that how you pronounce it?
Metzgenstein, I think, yeah.
Metzgergenstein. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I didn't dislike it. It was okay. It felt like kind of like a, I don't know, like not necessarily Twilight Zone, but it felt like that kind of a
Hmm,
story, like something you might see like on a like a TV kind of anthology show with
right,
like a slight terror bent, kind of thing, right? But
right, right.
yeah, it was fine. It was good. And Jane Fonda was interesting to watch, and it was a interesting take with using Peter Fonda as her love interest. And Toby Dammit, again, I appreciate the style and that it's very clear. It's just, yeah, I just don't get it. It's just not something that it just didn't. It wasn't irritating. It just sort of like I was like,
Right.
so what was it? What was that all about, right? So it was
But
just
you seem to
he
really
was, he
like
was
Louis
drunk and then
Malle.
he drove and he was dead. And
Yeah,
and like I appreciate the driving sequences where it was like these really
yeah,
like
yeah. They're quite hairy,
small
really.
and very claustrophobic and very sped up with the fast turns. But it was so long; it just kept going and going and going.
Right.
I was like, okay, I get it. Just yeah. So I don't know.
So which
I thought
which
it
one
was.
actually comes in third place? Metzgenstein or Toby Dammit?
I'd say Toby Dammit for me.
Ah,
Yeah. So
interesting. Okay,
yeah.
okay,
So yeah, that was wrong. So I go 2-1-3 for me.
okay. And but overall,
You'd say
do you think it's a pretty good
you
anthology?
you are what, like a 2-3-1?
Uh, um, my favorite would have been Toby Dammit 3-2. Yeah, yeah, 3-1. Yeah, in
Three,
reverse.
two, one.
Or
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So for me, it works because it escalates at the right. Each one was better than the previous one
Right. Yeah, yeah,
for me,
yeah.
so it kind of works.
Yours for you. It was a hamburger essay. I don't know if you know what that means.
I have no idea what that means. What does that mean?
Sorry, it's the total random.
Go on.
Okay, I've been teaching my son who's 12 how to write essays, and
Okay.
so we're working on what's called the hamburger essay.
Uh-huh.
So the hamburger essay is like it's a bun and the two buns on the top, and then
Yeah.
there's three things. There's meat and lettuce and tomato in the middle, right? So a hamburger essay is like you start with the opening paragraph where you introduce your points. Then you
Right.
have three, and your thesis statement. Then you have three things that you say, 3 points about it. And you're always supposed to do it your second strongest point, then your weakest point in the middle, and then you finish with your strongest point. And then you end with a conclusion, which just summarizes what you talked about again. That's like a very basic kind of like junior high school kind of essay style that they teach you how to write. It's a sort of like a basic essay style. And so for you, it's a 2-3-1, which is a hamburger essay, right? So
There we go. I've learned something.
there you go.
I've learned the same as a 12-year-old child at the age of 44.
You can do this. So now I want a 300-word essay on Toby Dammit by next week. So.
Fair enough. Yes. So I guess yeah. No, I would recommend. I think it's definitely a superior horror anthology. I mean, taken all together, you seem to have not hated the experience, at least in the
Yeah, it was okay. Yeah, it was fine. Yeah, I mean, that's a good thing about anthologies is that if you don't like one, there's always another one, right? So you might like another one, right? So yeah, which I mean, if they were all by Fellini, it might have gotten irritating. You know what I mean? Yeah, but because there are three totally different styles and visions, it was you can there's something for everyone, I guess, right?
Right. Okay, then. So let's move on to what did you choose? What was your reaction to Stiragon?
So as I said, I was originally going to choose Toby Dammit, but I couldn't find a copy of it until I realized that it was part of this movie. And so then I thought, you know what? I can't be bothered searching for any more movies. I was just tired and I was too busy. So I was like, okay, movies about Rome. Hey, Life of Brian. Let's do Life of Brian. We haven't done a Monty Python movie on the show yet, so
no. And technically, yes. I mean, it's set in Judea, but it is the Roman Empire, right? So it's
set in Rome. I literally just Googled movies about Rome, and it was on the list. So I was like, hey, I haven't seen Life of Brian in years. We haven't done a Monty Python on the show. I'm always you briefly talked about that. We talked about some, we did Gillian films.
Yes.
And so that you kind of briefly talked about it, but I think Monty Python is so, I don't know, it was so important in the it was really important for the framing and the genesis of so many things that came after it that was based on it, right? So many, that, and especially I've never really talked to an actual Brit about it. And about, so that's I was kind of like, I might as well use this as an opportunity to really kind of talk about them and their influence and from actually a British person's point of view, and someone who grew up, kind of not in the time period, but at least, closer to the time period than young people these days, right? So we're just
Monty Python was always on, so
so it was I had to kind of discover it because it wasn't as everywhere as it was, I'm sure, for you.
I was wondering about that as well. Actually, the other way around, I was kind of wondering how because obviously, they were famous all over the world, and they were even really popular here in Japan, right? But I wonder how, because there's such a fabric of the background of British culture, and I would imagine that it's not that intensity in Canada, right? But even though they're well known, but you're not necessarily bombarded by Python or post Python, all the Pythons doing other things like Michael Palin on TV and stuff like that. And
I think I don't know how you probably came through it from the Flying Circus or whatever, but my introduction was through Holy Grail, and so I think someone we all watched it together one day or something, or I'd heard a lot about it, and so Holy Grail. And then I didn't even know most of their I'd never seen any of their other stuff, actually. I just knew just Holy Grail for years.
Right.
And finally I saw it out and I watched Life of Brian and The Meaning of Life, and then eventually Flying Circus as well, kind of thing. But I didn't. But I think actually what happened was that's right. There was a special on TV. They used to have those on TV, those kind of just oh, it's like the Monty Python 20th anniversary, da 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 da
Yes,
da, and we're
yes,
going to show the best clips from Flying Circus and da da da
yes.
da, da, right? And you're like, and I was like, Monty, oh, those the Holy Grail guys, right? So I think I sat down and watched it, and it was like oh wait, it's floating back to me now. It was like the best sketches, and I remember it was in brackets. It was called Parrot Sketch Not Included or something like that.
Hosted by Steve Martin.
Maybe you saw the same thing,
I
right?
did.
And
Yes.
I remember thinking like, what the fuck is this parrot sketch? Why is it not included, right? And I remember like for years not knowing what the fuck does that even refer to, and it took me years to even track down what this parrot sketch even was. And I'm still not even sure why they cut it out of that way. It had to be specifically excluded, but I
Yeah.
guess maybe was it controversial or something? I don't know, right?
No, no, I think it was just maybe considered just like so obvious to include it that they didn't or something like that. Or
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah,
no,
but
I
at
watched that
the
as well.
time I
I
was
was watching
thinking
that.
like, was it so controversial that they couldn't include it? Like, I was really just intrigued by it. So I
It's
thought,
weird. I remember watching that on television and then discovering it on video as well. And the video cassette was longer and it did include the Paris sketch. It was like
oh, really?
there was like a
Okay.
slightly longer version. But I remember them because Steve Martin's quite good in it because Steve Martin is a massive fan, right? But I
Sure.
don't know how well you remember it. He kind of plays it like he doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Well, that's
and
Steve Martin. He
they
does
keep
that, right?
prodding him off screen with like a
Yeah.
spear
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
stuff to go like, I love them and stuff like that. It's actually
Yeah.
quite
Yeah. Yeah.
it's quite funny.
Yeah. 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 I remember really enjoying that special, and then
Mm.
sort of having that be almost my introduction to Python, really. So,
Yeah, there's some
so
great stuff in there because what I like about that one as well is because Monty Python, there was 4 seasons of it, and then I can't remember who dropped. Is it John Cleese dropped out first, and then someone else? So the
yeah.
third season is missing one, and the fourth season is missing someone else. And there's
Yeah, I
definitely
heard
like
an interview with John Cleese, and he talked about he felt he dropped out third season because he thought they were just repeating themselves. I
yes,
think. Yeah,
yes,
so
and they definitely did go, but they were such high quality from the beginning that even the later series do have really good bits in, and I think some of them are in. It's quite a good anthology that Parrot Sketch Not Included because they have the one if you remember the highwayman who only steals lupins of flowers. Do you remember that?
yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah, this
I want to go back and see if we can find that special
I
again. I'd
think
love
it's
to
on
see it again.
YouTube. I think you can
Yeah,
probably
I'm sure it is. Yeah, so
yeah.
yeah,
But yes, no, no, actually, that was so. I remember Monty Python being on when I was a kid, and I was watching more contemporary comedy. And I remember my parents were huge Monty Python fans, and I was watching something else on another channel, and my father was like, "Oh, why don't you watch this? Monty Python's on the other channel." And I remember quite liking it. It was a Terry Gilliam animation with the
mm.
old woman pushing the pram, and then the pram starts eating people, and it
Oh
chases.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And I thought, yeah, but I'm watching this other thing, so I kind of forgot about it again. And
Mm.
then I think it might actually have been that Paris Sketch Not Included came on TV, and that was the first time I like really sat down and concentrated on. So oddly enough, it was also a gateway thing for me. And then
Yeah,
after that, they started showing it again from the beginning,
right.
and yeah, then I really got into it and recorded them all after and watched them just again and again and again and again and again.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was also the kind of the slightly forgotten Python movie is pre Holy Grail. There was a film called And Now Something for Completely Different. Now Something
Something completely different.
Completely
Yeah,
Different.
never. I actually, yeah, I did remember that one too. It's after something
Yeah.
completely different. So,
And that was basically sketches from the show, but they redid them. They refilmed them with
right.
film
Okay, I think I
camera.
saw that too. Or
Yeah.
there was also like a live at the Hollywood Bowl. Was there another one where they did
Yes, Live at the Hollywood
came back?
Bowl.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think I saw that
Concert
one too
film.
as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I remember seeing catching the end of And Now for Something Completely Different was on early in the morning one day on a weekend, I remember, and it was the upper class twit of the year contest, and I remember that was another thing that I saw. I thought, oh yeah, maybe I should give these Python guys a shot, right? Because
Shot right.
what I've seen so far is pretty good,
Pretty
and
good. Yeah,
and
right.
it
So
held up because it's stuff from the late '60s, early '70s, and I'm watching it in the mid to late '80s into the
mm,
'90s, and it's still really holding up, and it still
yeah,
seems anarchic and just
sure.
smart, and like it's
Huh.
not very little of it is dated.
Mm,
I mean, there's some of the stuff with the Pythons like dressing up as little old ladies and stuff like that is maybe um slightly outdated just in terms of we just don't do stuff like that anymore, but not
Yeah.
so much because it's not funny. It's still actually kind of funny.
Yeah. I think well, on that thing, I think John Cleese recently has gotten himself into trouble for being like,
Yeah, he's
like
anti-woke, isn't he, as John
yeah,
Cleese?
anti-woke, yeah. So I was like, okay, yeah. So I think that, but yeah, maybe it was from that period, right? Kind of thing, right? So
Yeah, I don't know. He's lost the plot a little bit, doesn't he? And
yeah,
because well, it's only him and Palin. Oh, and Eric Idle, he's still
Eric
around.
Idle still
Yeah.
left,
Oh,
yeah.
and
So
Gilliam, of course.
and Gilliam, yeah,
It's
so
actually
yeah,
only two who've died. Graham Chapman, who died a long time ago, and Terry Jones, right?
right,
The director of Life of Brian.
right, yeah,
Yeah, so they'd done
and
Double Duty. Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam had co-directed Holy Grail, and then they decided, well, that didn't really work out smoothly, so Terry Jones took over the direction of Life of Brian, and Gilliam's like the art director, right? Which
right,
seems to have
sure,
worked, which is why it looks so good, right? Like,
yeah.
uh,
And yeah, and yeah, to be honest, this was like the one I think I saw the very, very last of them all. And it
okay,
sort of like was kind of off my radar. And so I thought this was a good one to revisit because I actually didn't remember much about this one. And so I've seen, Holy Grail a few times and I've seen, Meaning of Life a few times, but I think I only saw this once and it was only many years ago.
oh,
So
okay,
actually watching it again, it was almost like I was watching it anew. Like there's a lot of stuff I didn't remember. And total like this is like the universe. Sometimes just like things happen. You ever have a habit where like you watch something and then suddenly something from that keeps popping up at the same
yes,
time, even though it's something that would
timing
never
is
pop
just
up
yeah,
normally.
yeah.
So total random. This is gonna be kind of a strange story, but so last weekend both my kids who are 10 and 12 years old were in a musical. They're in a tip musical, like a musical, like an English musical, right? So
Uh-huh.
for kids. And it was like 9 to 12-year-olds or something like that doing this musical about a dragon and stuff. It's like a
Hmm.
50-minute kids musical. And so I went to go see it over the weekend twice, and so we were there. And so there was like two groups. There was the younger kids, which is like 10 to 12, whatever, and then there was like a 13 to 17 teenage group. And because it's all kind of part of the same thing, my kids got free tickets to go see the other group.
Hmm.
So my wife and I had to pay. So we're like, okay, well, let's all go. We'll go see. And they were doing The Sword and the Stone.
Okay.
Okay, right. And so now the idea I think was that both groups were supposed to do musicals, but I think the Sword and the Stone script didn't have any music in it. So what the director decided to do, interestingly, I don't know, is that they just chose a bunch of pop songs that were vaguely thematically linked and then just shoehorn them
Uh-huh.
into the thing. So there was like a Ed Sheeran song and like a Bruno Mars. It was like Sword of the Stone with Ed Sheeran and Katy Perry and like a Bruno Mars song. And strangely enough, Always Look on the Bright Side of
Oh,
Life.
really? Okay.
Right. So I literally had watched this movie on Friday night. And then Saturday evening, I went to go see this random bunch of teenagers doing the Sword of the Stone, and here they are on stage singing.
Wow.
Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. I was like, what? Like, how bizarre is that? So it's very.
When you're chewing on last gristle, Gramble, give a
And
whistle.
that, it was, and in the show, it was sung by this like Italian like teenager who's like Italian. So it's like so you couldn't even really get his
Right.
mouth around the words. It was quite funny. So yeah, but
Okay. Oh, it's interesting
anyway,
your experience though with the so a flip for me, like watching this was like I I could have done this without watching it again. Like
sure, yeah,
I remembered every single fucking scene and line from this film.
right, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but it's
But
interesting. So
I think it still holds up.
oh,
I mean,
it's
like
great. It's great.
everything,
Yeah.
it still makes me laugh. I mean, I mean, even like I think it was only my second time seeing it, and I didn't remember a lot of it, but like I laughed out loud a lot, right? Even
That's
though it
good.
was made, yeah. So
I'm glad you had that because for me it's so beyond like can't even tell anymore. It's because it's
right,
just
yeah, it's funny, yeah,
it's in here, right? Like
yeah,
I'll give you
sure,
an example of just how so you asking about like from the British perspective as well. Like I think Life of Brian is so it's interesting as well because Life of Brian, oddly enough, until I think early 90s, didn't actually play on television, as far as I know.
Well, I was looking up some trivia as I was watching it,
Yeah.
and I guess this movie was really,
Oh
really
yes. Oh
like
yes.
scandalous, right? I guess,
Yeah.
or like
Some
huge.
local councils banned it.
Yeah, and it said like some places like in Wales or something like
Yeah.
that
Yeah. It was banned.
didn't even show until like 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it
Yeah.
was
It
that
was.
band.
Yeah. Yeah. It was very. In fact, there's a very a good follow up. So in 2011, they made this BBC TV comedy called Holy Flying Circus, which
Mm,
is like a comedic look at when Life of Brian was released in.
right.
It's really quite funny as well. It's really good
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with different people playing the Pythons, and
Sure.
it's quite good. But yeah, no, it was hugely controversial, and John Cleese and Michael Palin went on television to debate with the fucking Archbishop of somewhere or other, and
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah,
There's yeah. Okay, I read about this. Yeah.
yeah, and Malcolm Muggeridge and the born again Christian guy, and no, no, and the thing is, it wouldn't play on television. I think it was on video. It was around on video, but you wouldn't really see it in rental stores. It seemed to be more of a like a sell-through tape. I remember
Uh,
being around. I don't remember seeing
Wait,
it.
was it a video nasty?
No, 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 no.
Oh, okay.
And like I said, it was more of a local count. Like it wasn't banned by the BBFC, and it wasn't cut, and it wasn't, it wasn't officially. It was local councils would decide,
Mm,
the standards of their community, whether they show or whatever. So it was
mm,
kind of weird. It was one of those things that was notorious, but you wouldn't necessarily have got to see it. And then in the early 90s on Channel 4, they had they'd have these seasons every now and again, like banned films or controversial films or whatever. And they showed Life of Brian. That's when I first saw it and taped it off television and then
right.
just watched it again and again and again and
Over
again.
and over and
Yeah.
over.
And then after that, it must have been due to that. It re-entered the consciousness because Always Look at the Bright Side of Life in the 90s was re-released and became a hit
Huh.
single again.
Yeah, I mean, I know that song quite well,
Right.
and even though I've only seen this movie maybe one other time, yeah, I know that song, yeah, very well.
Yeah,
So yeah,
because I remember there's a radio edit, right? So there's the
yeah, right, sure, yeah.
not life's a piece of shit when you look at it. It's life's a piece
Right.
of spit was
Oh,
the radio
okay,
edit version.
right.
Um, but yeah, so just in case anyone doesn't know, it's Judea under the Romans, and Graham Chapman plays Brian, who's kind of like uh he's not Jesus. That's the thing. In fact, you even see Jesus at the beginning of the film, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He's a
He
Sermon
was
on the
born
Mount.
in the manger next to Jesus, and
Yes,
the
yeah,
wise men make the mistake and go to the wrong
yeah.
place, and like, oh no, sorry, it's supposed to be over there,
Yeah, Terry
right? And so then
Terry
he kind of
Jones
grows
is
up getting mistaken for Jesus, right?
yeah,
Kind of
Terry
thing.
Jones is his mother, right? Who's that great line? Because the three wise men turn up, but they're like, "Thanks for the gold and frankincense, not so much of the myrrh next
You can take the bar next time.
time." Which is, yeah. So yeah, so he's basically growing up at the same time, and it's interesting. If you ever watch any Python documentaries, either about them in general, or the making of Life of Brian and stuff, I mean, they really did their research. Like they went out and they researched this particular period of time, and they discovered that there was almost kind of like a messiah mania or something at this time, right? And there was loads of people. There were loads of people like claiming to do and people were looking for someone to follow, right? So,
Sure.
so Brian's like kind of like an also ran right alongside
Uh,
Jesus.
well, but his was more of an accidental, like because
Yes, yeah,
he's like no, don't listen to me, stop doing it. And they're like and then so
yes,
they do it. They're determined to follow him, right? Kind of thing, which
yes,
is of course it's funny in itself, right?
yes,
But I mean, as a pretty hardcore atheist, I'm almost certain this is probably actually what happened.
yeah, 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 yeah. Like
Yeah,
he says, he's not the messiah. He's a very naughty boy, right?
yeah, yes. He's a very
But
naughty
but
boy.
that's the thing with this film. It's endlessly quotable, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yes, yeah.
yeah, like
So many quotes. Yeah,
I remember seeing the first time and just pissing myself laughing.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
so many funny bits in this, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
from quite smart, clever things to really obvious sight gags, like I was blind and now I can see. Oh, he falls in the hole. It's just yeah, it's so good, and it's it's that really rare thing where it's not it's not overly polemical, it's not overly pushing a message, it's just being funny, but at the same time it is actually telling you so much about
yes.
organized
And
religion.
it's enough to make Christians say like, hey, you're blaspheming and da 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 stuff.
Yeah.
It's enough to get their hackles up, right? So, but I mean, it never actually says anything about
No, well,
Jesus or
Terry
anything.
Jones makes a very interesting point. He makes the,
Yeah.
the point that if anything, it's not blasphemous because it's not, if anything, it's heretical because it's kind of anti-organized religion as opposed to, because the thing they always say is when we started, we were like, well, you can't make fun of Christ really because there's nothing funny about his message. His message is just like be good to everyone.
Yeah,
and
sure.
There's nothing funny about that, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
nothing to deflate.
But if anything, it's actually, I mean, I don't even know if it's heretical. I mean, at the beginning, you see Jesus, he's got the lights, it looks like it's thing, and then he's on the mount, he's giving his sermon, and like everything he does is biblical. It's all part of their philosophy. You kind of think nothing. They didn't say anything about Jesus not being
Right.
the Messiah, right?
No,
So
it's all about
what they're upset about, right? They're just upset saying like that maybe people followed him even though he wasn't, right? So, but it never actually says that, right? So
that whole sequence, isn't it, where he's basically running away from a crowd and one is seizing his shoe and no, follow the board, and that's kind of all you need to know about.
And that's the Protestants and the Catholics and whatever. So.
And then the other thing as well, which is quite funny. This is the only thing that I don't know. I think it still works. The gag still works, but was probably more immediately relevant in the late 70s. Is the people's group of Judea, right? The Romans are like they're very symbolic of parties on the left at that time, which were more kind of seemed to be expending more energy on like pointing out the differences between each other rather than actually kind of getting
the fact that they're actually basically the same thing, and they could working together to affect any kind of change, right?
Yeah.
So
are you the people of Judea's front? Fuck off! We're the people's front of Judea. It's like they hate the other slightly different leftists more than
yeah. And then the guy was just by himself.
Yeah, and then apparently the other gag that apparently I've heard works really, really well. Again, we get it or whatever, but it works really well if you're of a slightly older demographic, is when Brian is caught doing the graffiti and the Roman legionnaire corrects his Latin.
Oh, yes.
That's something like if you went to public school and you had to do Latin, you had
apparently,
like
apparently John Cleese actually
he did.
Is a Latin teacher. So apparently it was all completely correct and stuff like that. So,
and that seems great, it's like and he's twisting his ear and pass. That's
he does it so many times. Yeah. I mean, there's not a flat joke in the whole movie. Like it's just like rapid fire jokes. So it's and it's all like still relevant even so many years later. So that it's it all still lands. I mean, it might not be as cutting as it was for certain things, but I think in general it all still works. So I was well happy to revisit this movie again. I didn't get to hear about you. I thought you were probably rolling over Brian kind of thing, but I enjoyed.
Oh no. This is a classic. Like I said, I didn't necessarily have to watch it because it's all in here, but it's certainly and to talk about it is interesting. And so it's the birth of handmade films as well, right? Basically, George Harrison bankrolled it. Like I just wanted to see it. It just was it. Yes, shot in Tunisia. Some of the leftover things from Zeffirelli's Christ. Actually, one of the few times you'll hear me say something positive about Star Wars. Actually, so the art direction on this film is by this guy called Roger Christian, who later went on to direct some movies like The Sender is quite an interesting like a psychic horror movie in the early 80s. He later went on to do do you remember Battlefield Earth?
Oh yeah, that's one of the worst movies ever of all time. I remember my friend from university seeing that and just he for years he would go on and on about how terrible the movie was.
a saga of the year
Yeah.
3000, right?
Yeah. I don't think I ever actually saw it, but I heard over and over and over again from my friend how terrible it was. So
It is quite astonishingly bad. Anyway, he
and
did
it's on like lists of like worst movies ever
yeah,
made.
yeah.
Yes.
But Roger Christian worked on the art direction for this, and he did in for Star Wars as well when he was in Tunisia. And the one thing I've always kind of appreciated, the thing I like about Star Wars is what Roger Christian does with it, because what he was saying was, and this I think this holds. The one thing, great thing about Star Wars is the fact is usually when you put something in the future and you have like futuristic technology and stuff, it's all like sparkling and clean looking and stuff like that, right? And it was Roger Christian. I think it was basically his idea more so than George Lucas. I think
Make it kind of like dirty and a little bit
he was
old.
like, well, this stuff would have been around for years,
Yeah.
like in
Yeah.
the future. So it's him that makes everything look kind of, grotty.
Used.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good on Roger. That's one element of Star Wars that I appreciate, and he obviously brought something to this along with Terry Gilliam. I suppose you could, if you were to nitpick, if you were to argue, if there's one sequence in the film that kind of feels a little bit like cheating, but gets away with it anyway, is the bit with the spaceship, right?
Yeah.
A bit.
Totally it comes out of
Yeah.
left field. You certainly don't expect that to go anywhere.
No,
So I mean,
but it kind of gets away with it, right?
but it definitely feels Python-esque, right? It's definitely,
Yeah.
where they have these sort of like random things that have no connection and then never comes back again. So
Yeah. Well, it's as
yeah.
close as to, I suppose, in the original series when a Terry Gilliam animation would suddenly come in and take you from
Sure.
one, because that was the
Yeah.
thing.
Take you
Sometimes
from
they
one thing to
wouldn't
another.
know,
Yeah. The
yeah,
transition, right?
how
Yeah.
to finish the sketch. So they just like, well, call Terry in and
Yeah.
just get us from here to there, and he'd bugger off and do something, and then they
Yeah.
wouldn't see it until it was on air, right? Like,
Yeah. The end. Yeah.
just and at least it's fully aware of how ridiculous it is. Like, because
Yeah.
like we
Sure.
get at the spaceship and that passerby just goes, "You lucky bastard!" Is just, um yeah, no, could talk about it. Could talk about it all day, really. But
Yeah,
I'm
I figured you'd have a lot to say about it because I've always wanted to. Yeah, so Chrissy, of the big three, Meaning of Life and Holy Grail on this one, which is your favorite?
I think objectively this is the best film they ever made. I think I think definitely this is the best one. I think my personal favorite is Meaning of Life. For various kind of we've mentioned it before. We won't get into it just in case we actually get around to doing it someday, maybe. Because there'd be a lot to talk about. Actually, that as well, I think that also played in that wasn't banned exactly, but I think that was considered like a bit too hot for
Racy.
TV.
Yeah, every sperm is sacred.
Yeah, exactly. Until they showed
Yeah.
it on TV in the 90s, and there's kind of violence in it as well, and there's the great sequence, with all the topless women chasing Graham Chapman. Do you remember that when he's like,
Right, yeah.
he's chosen the nature of his own death, right? It's just like, yeah, I think that's my favorite, personal favorite. But
Right.
how about you?
I think I have to revisit them all to kind of compare them, but because it had always been Holy Grail for me, just because
Holy
that's
Grail
kind
is a
of the
lot of
first
people's absolute favorites.
absolute favorite, and it's the
Yeah.
one that I sort of like. If I think of Python, that's the one I think of it because it's my first one. But I think and it's also the one I've seen the most. But I think especially this one I'd only seen once before, but I really, really, really enjoyed this one. So I really want to go back and maybe watch Meaning of Life 2 as well, and just kind of revisit them all, and maybe even go back to Flying Circus. But yeah, so
Yeah, Holy Grail's always been my least favorite, even though it's very, very funny. But I can understand why people who love Monty Python's Flying Circus love it, because I think it's the one closest to the show, right? Because
right.
it's the most almost like a series of sketches. I mean, you could Life of Brian as well to a certain extent is episodic, but it does have a strong through line and
Narrative,
it feels like A Meaning of Life is just another sketch show. So
sure.
Life of Brian feels like the closest they came to making a proper film in and of itself, right? As opposed to a series of skits.
Right. Yeah.
But I know a lot of people do like Holy Grail is like because it's so Python-esque, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. So yeah.
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 Anything else you have to say about this?
insert good quote here. So you're the quote man.
Who's in the house? JC. That's from Jesus Camp. That's what they all. That's what they sing at their get together. Who's in the house? JC. Which always made me laugh. Oh, you've seen Jesus Camp, right? Do you remember that documentary? Oh, okay.
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Anyway.
I meant like a quote from this movie, but even this like what? What's he saying? Wait, what were the things that they were mishearing? Like
the Sermon on the. Oh yeah.
Blessed are the
makers or something like that.
Cheesemakers, yeah. So wait, what he doesn't realize is the meek are actually part of the problem, right? Like
my favorite one is because I forget her name, the actress Gwen. She was later in. That's another thing I might do the Rittles as a I don't know. There's so many ways you could go with this.
Yeah, sure.
The actress who plays, I like her line where he goes, "Oh, blessed are the meek. Oh, I'm glad they're getting something. They've had such a hard time." Yeah, but like I said, you don't want to be the
endlessly
quoting. Actually, I will finish with. Actually, I forgot. I wanted to tell you this story just because you were asking specifically like how much of an impact is or how prevalent this is in British culture. So I went to the Reading Music Festival in 1996, and you got the stages over there, the gigs and stuff, and then over here you've got the camping area, right? And everyone would stay up like late after all the music had finished or whatever. And I remember one night we were in our tent, and there's all sea of tents basically. And we were drinking and we were getting stoned or whatever. And for some reason we had the idea to start doing the famous. So we were like, what have the Romans ever done for us? And there was like a bit of a pause, and then some tent way off went, the aqueduct, and then another one did, like, and they listed everything. It went on ages, and then finally we had to bring peace. Oh, shut up! So everyone knew it. It was like amazing.
It was
moment. Yeah. Okie doke then. I guess that's us. Until next time. Shitty bye. Have you frozen, Ron? Oh yeah, he's frozen. That's right, we're done. So I'll say goodbye for Ron. Goodbye.